You betrayed your city. You caused your lovely wife heartache.
Corrupt cops think they can get away with anything until they step into the courtroom. Today, we'll be witnessing officers who believed they were untouchable get instantly exposed and put in their place. On January 28, 2015, Floyd Dent, 58, was out and about when Officer Melendez stopped him for a minor traffic offense. However, Melendez's subsequent choices resulted in horrible injuries for Dent, and the officer's intentions will shock you.
The responding police officers arrived as the defendant is wrestling the defendant to the ground. Mr. Dent was struck, kicked, and tased while on the ground by what appeared to be a group of angry, anxious police officers that celebrated after the defendant was beaten and cuffed.
Our police force is tarnished by such idiots. They pose as victims while unlawfully using force on the same individuals they are supposed to protect. The amount of police brutality cases is alarming.
The responding police officers arrived as the defendant is wrestling the defendant to the ground. Mr. Dent was struck, kicked, and tased while on the ground by what appeared to be a group of angry, anxious police officers that celebrated after the defendant was beaten and cuffed.
I don't understand how these police officers even manage to live with themselves. These officers are indicative of persistent problems in our police force that need to be addressed immediately and aggressively.
But the one image that struck out to the court was looking at Mr. Dent in his cell, shaking his head. In disbelief of what had occurred to him. If his conduct was indicative of what he was thinking, I would have thought this: what crime did I commit? Being a black man in a Cadillac, stopped for a minor traffic offense by a group of racist police officers looking to do a nigga.
Melendez is one of the dumbest cops I have ever encountered. Because of his reckless actions, his life will never be the same.
But the one image that struck out to the court was looking at Mr. Dent in his cell, shaking his head. In disbelief of what had occurred to him. If his conduct was indicative of what he was thinking, I would have thought this: what crime did I commit? Being a black man in a Cadillac, stopped for a minor traffic offense by a group of racist police officers looking to do a nigga. The purpose of it was to harass and degrade a motorist in Inkster. The man chosen for your game was Floyd Dent, a black man. The game went like this: let's follow a car in a known drug area, and based on your years of training experience, you knew that the motorist would likely be a black person, no license, armed with a gun or drugs in a vehicle.
The old scheme with the bogus letters. Melendez clearly took this judge too lightly, and that was his biggest mistake.
At the station, the other eye of justice captured you and your posse making fun of Mr. Dent, mimicking him struggling while you all wiped the blood off your uniforms with disinfectant while he watched. Such an awesome, caring, properly trained police officer. You led your fellow officers down a path of cowardly behavior. You betrayed your city. You caused your lovely wife heartache. And you caused Mr. Dent severe anguish.
I bet he can't make fun of Mr. Dent now. I'm willing to bet that he no longer had the courage, considering the disaster of a situation he'd put himself in.
I can only punish your conduct, but only you and God can change your character. I've had an opportunity to listen to both sides. And I had to say this because I didn't say this during the trial, but it was my privilege to be able to oversee this trial because I had great lawyers.
Look at his face. This man felt awful not because he felt bad about what he did to Mr. Dent, but because he got caught and punished for his actions.
I am going to commit you to the Michigan Department of Corrections. However, after weighing the allegations in this particular matter and looking at all the circumstances, including what you've done and who the person I really believe that you are, I'm going to commit you to the Michigan Department of Corrections as to count 1 for no less than 13 months, no more than 10 years. As to count 2, I'm going to give you 90 days credit for time served and close it out. The court's going to give you 85 days for credit. You have 42 days to appeal my decision. That concludes this matter. Thank you.
He was still given comparatively less time for his actions. For his heinous acts, he merits a longer sentence in prison. In this next case, we have a cop who got the punishment he definitely deserved for his wicked deed, which you will struggle to believe.
The Class E felony of involuntary manslaughter in the second degree, I sentence you to a term of incarceration in the Missouri Division of Adult Institutions of 3 years.
On 4th March 2022, former Kansas police detective Eric DeValcaneri was standing trial in November for killing Cameron Lamb in Kansas City, Missouri, and ended up in front of Jackson County Circuit Judge Dale Youngs.
Eric DeValcaneri on count 1, the Class E felony of involuntary manslaughter in the second degree, I sentence you to a term of incarceration in the Missouri Division of Adult Institutions of 3 years. On the unclassified felony of armed criminal action, I sentence you to a term of incarceration of 6 years in the Missouri Department of Corrections. Those cases, or rather those counts and sentences, will run concurrent with one another for a total term of incarceration of 6 years. And the parties have a right to expect that no matter what I hear, I will only consider factors that are appropriate and that I will disregard those that are inappropriate. And that is what I've done here. And as a result, I've concluded as follows. There are a number of facts in this case that are both aggravating and mitigating, sometimes all at the same time. First and foremost is this undeniable and uncontested fact. Cameron Lamb is dead. And Eric DeValcaneri.
Although the judge's tone gave the impression that he was impartial, he would impose a just punishment.
That's undisputed. Cameron Lamb was by all accounts a helpful and loving son, brother, father, and friend. People who have contacted me and who I have heard from today have described him as funny, caring, giving. Miss Gray called him a protector, a jokester, and my favorite of all the ones that I read, not a saint, but our angel. Cameron Lamb's death leaves an irreparable and unfillable void in the lives of his family and his friends, and also in our community.
The remarks made by his friends and family are incredibly heartbreaking.
Also, as I'm weighing all these facts, it can't be overlooked that the events of December 3rd of 2019 were initially set into motion by Cameron Lamb and his decision to chase his girlfriend through city streets at dangerously high speeds, putting motorists and other members of the public at risk. However, those events tragically concluded with the actions of Troy Schwam and the defendant pulling up to defendant's house, Sergeant Schwam pulling into the driveway, immediately getting out with his weapon drawn, rapidly moving into the backyard, carport, garage area of the house, and defendant doing the same. Both without taking a breath, without pausing for the briefest of moments to consider where they were going, what they would find when they got back there, whether they were acting lawfully in doing so, and whether there might be some other safer option, without so much as a, "Hey Troy, wait." At any point, Sergeant Schwam and the defendant could have done this, a fact that is made even more aggravating as the court considers an appropriate sentence in this case by the fact that the one person who ultimately did take a breath that morning was Cameron Lamb.
The judge considered the issue with as little bias as possible, but Eric's crime was simply too horrible to overlook.
He did this when at some point, while he was chasing his girlfriend, he decided to discontinue the chase and to go home. The video from the helicopter shows this decision, shows how it played out. Cameron Lamb is not racing through the streets of his neighborhood at this point. He's not driving through yards to get away from anyone. He does not abandon the truck and let it roll into someone's yard while he flees on foot. Rather, he simply pulls into the driveway of his home, pulls around back, puts the vehicle into reverse, and slowly begins backing it down the driveway under the carport and into his garage. Then Sergeant Schwam and Eric DeValconaire arrive, and as the court has found, an encounter that was over and a situation that had de-escalated was again escalated by what I have found, rightly or wrongly, was their unlawful entry into the backyard carport area and confrontation of Cameron Lamb. This is an aggravating factor. The circumstances of the offenses described during the trial, however, also provide the court with a mitigating factor.
And this is when things were about to take a turn for the worse.
I found, as I've considered the evidence in the case, that the defendant, Eric DeValconaire, testified credibly at trial that he was rushing to provide cover for Sergeant Schwam, who had rushed into the backyard with his weapon drawn, prompting the defendant to do the same from the other side of the house. Although not in the court's view, again, rightly or wrongly, negating his obligation to act with reasonable care, as the court found he has failed to do, his natural reaction to protect his partner is a factor for me to also consider. And let's also be clear, and it is hard to accept this distinction, I know that. Murder and involuntary manslaughter arising from criminal negligence are two different things. They are different legal concepts. They are different things. Eric DeValconaire is not Derek Chauvin, who murdered George Floyd. Eric DeValconaire is not one of the 3 men in Georgia convicted of running down and murdering Ahmaud Arbery. This is a mitigating factor. Defendant has no prior criminal history. His ORAS scores him as a low risk in all categories. Defendant's history as a police officer, husband and father, friend and colleague is also a mitigating factor that I have taken into account, as his father asked me to do.
Despite his best efforts, the judge was unable to improve the cop's image. It is impossible to sugarcoat
Which I was already going to do, and that is to consider the totality of the circumstances and to consider the totality of the defendant's life. The facts and the circumstances in the history of defendant's career and his life that have been presented to this court have demonstrated he has not hesitated to immediately take action when he believed the circumstances surrounding him warranted it. And this trait has generally served him and others well. It also failed him, as it did on December 3rd of 2019. All of which, however, leads the court back to where it began, an evaluation of the impact of the defendant's crime on Cameron Lamb and his family.
It was the officer's lack of composure that caused Cameron to die. He would still be alive if the situation had been handled differently.
Cameron Lamb is dead. Eric DeValconaire killed him. And the court has found that that happened because the defendant acted without considering or being aware of the substantial and unjustifiable risks associated with his conduct, and that his actions were a gross deviation from the standard of care that a reasonable person would exercise in the situation. Having concluded, as I have, having considered all those factors, I ask counsel if there's any legal reason or cause having been shown why sentence.
The judge then gave the cop the sentence, and this was the bare minimum for what he had done.
Or should not now be pronounced.
Time from the state line.
No, sir.
Eric DeValconaire on count 1, the Class E felony of involuntary manslaughter in the second degree, I sentence you to a term of incarceration in the Missouri Division of Adult Institutions of 3 years. On the unclassified felony of armed criminal action, I sentence you to a term of incarceration of 6 years in the Missouri Department of Corrections. Those cases, or rather those counts and sentences, will run concurrent with one another for a total term of incarceration of 6 years.
The cop only received 6 years in prison for Cameron. If this man hadn't been a police officer, the punishment would have been far worse. But make sure to take a look at this next judge, who delivered the ultimate justice and set an example for how the justice system should be.
It's clear to me that you're a remorseless killer, and I don't say that lightly.
In March 2024, Daniel Howard stood his last trial for the murder of his wife. Daniel claimed it was a suicide for 2 years, but after an investigation, you will be stunned by what the investigators found.
Is the defendant Daniel C. Howard guilty or not guilty of domestic battery? Guilty. Count 2. Is the defendant Daniel C. Howard guilty or not guilty of murder in the first degree? Not guilty. Is the defendant Daniel Howard guilty or not guilty of second-degree murder? Guilty.
Counsel, I'm proposing a sentencing date of May 23rd at 1:30 p.m. That's available. I will order a PSI or a pre-sentence investigation. Mr. Howard, I'll have you talk with your attorney about that. You have the right to participate or not participate in that. You continue to have the right to remain silent. Mr. Howard is remanded into custody. I'll see everyone back May 23rd at 1:30 for sentencing. We will be in recess.
Envious, Daniel brutally strangled wife Kendi. In the courtroom with a standing trial, Kendi's daughter made a powerful and memorable remark that shook the courtroom.
I struggle with guilt and I struggle with not knowing. I wish I could have convinced her to stay with me instead of going home that night. The fear on her face and in her voice when she told me about how she woke up with him standing over her will never leave me. Nothing will fill the hole he has created. Nothing can fix or undo what he has done. But her name can be free. The thought that he can no longer have control over her name, her memory, and her spirit gives me a sense of peace.
Daniel claimed he was innocent, despite all of the evidence against him, but the judge made sure to take him to the dry cleaners.
I'm not that monster, I assure you, that people are portraying me.
What we know, beyond a reasonable doubt, is that you strangled your wife, you murdered her, and then you staged her naked body in the bathtub, shot her through the mouth, and tried to pass this off as a suicide. That's proven beyond a reasonable doubt. In horrible crimes like this, everybody wants to know why. And often we don't know why, and I can't get inside your brain, but the pretty clear evidence, I agree with the state, is that this was due to, jealousy, greed, pride, anger, revenge, some combination of that.
Howard's portrayal of the suicide further demonstrated his monstrous nature. It's really hard to believe he was a law enforcement officer at one point.
You didn't just, when you killed Andy, you didn't just kill your wife. You killed a mother, you killed a grandmother, you killed a sister, you killed a daughter, you killed a coworker, you killed somebody who brought a lot of life and light to those around her and those she touched. And you snuffed that out because of your own pride, greed, and anger. Despite your efforts at the time to appear emotional and sad and distraught, it's clear to me that you're a remorseless killer. And I don't say that lightly. I don't say that lightly at all, because we don't like to think that anybody would be like that. Your own stepdaughter, your granddaughter, with a cold and callous contempt after the murder, it belies your argument to me today that you love these people and that you're sorry. As Brooke indicated, you never even talked to her about this after the fact. Your behavior towards her was contemptuous and unkind. And I'm not sentencing you for that. There was a lot of stuff that came in at the trial as to how you treated people after the fact, and how you treated your stepdaughter after the fact, and not allowing your granddaughter to get items that were meaningful and significant. But that's not why you're being sentenced today. But that does point to the remorse, the lack of remorse, the lack of caring, and just the callous disregard that you had for Kendi and how her death affected those around her. And that you had these same thoughts. You were talking about allowing people to live through your own self-control and restraint, understanding why people would kill their, quote, old ladies and go to prison. And so you're 58 years old. I don't see a lot of rehabilitation, sadly, in your future. Maybe, perhaps, but that's not a significant mitigating factor in sentencing you.
As the judge continued to question him, the disgusting felon remained straight and showed no remorse for his conduct.
There's a severe punishment for murder, for your wife, and there's no sort of mitigation because the marriage is on the rocks, or the wife was unfaithful, or things like that. There's absolutely no justification here for murder of your wife, and I think it's important that the sentence sends that message as well. But what I know beyond a reasonable doubt is that you strangled or asphyxiated your wife. You murdered her. You staged her body to be found as if it were suicide. It's an outrageously egregious murder. And of course, all murder is, but this is particularly heinous in my view, having sat through the trial and seen all the evidence.
The judge soon issued a sentence, and it was immediately apparent what fate this vicious individual would face.
The nature and gravity of the offense standing alone is sufficient to justify a fixed life sentence, and that is what I'm going to impose here. I think Kendi's family deserves to have that closure. The crime is so egregious that I don't think you should be released at any point in the future. And I don't impose that lightly. I have thought long and hard about this, considered all the evidence, considered aggravation and mitigation. There's just so little mitigation here. There's just really none.
Throughout the proceedings, the judge maintained composure and compassion. At last, he read the punishment, giving Kendi's family consolation and a sense of justice.
So I do find that a fixed life sentence is appropriate for the count of murder in the second degree. On the domestic violence charge, I'll impose 10-year sentence and run it concurrent. I didn't even speak about that. Really, I'm not. I don't mean to give that charge short shrift. The jury found that you were violent and abusive to your wife as well. It's just that, frankly, the killing alone subsumes it all, in my view. And so I'm running that. The domestic violence charge of 10 years will run concurrent with your life sentence.
Howard received a life sentence without the chance of parole. Knowing that the dangerous man will be imprisoned for the remainder of his life is a comfort. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and comment down below with your thoughts. And if you liked this video, you'll love this next one where these corrupt cops got owned in the courtroom.
I said that originally, but they told me that the judge don't make the rules here. That was the quote that they